This is what public enemy number one, John Dillinger, actually did when he found out Bonnie and Clyde were dead. Not the movie version, the real record of the 60 days between their ambush and his own. And I'll tell you right now, the man handled it about like my cousin handled his check engine light. He saw the light come on and he knew exactly what it meant and he drove it anyway. On May the 23rd, 1934, Dillinger was hiding out in Calumet City, Illinois, just outside Chicago. That same morning, down in Bienville Parish, Louisiana, a 6-man posse put around 130 bullets into a stolen Ford V8 with Clyde and Bonnie Parker in it. Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker inside of it. Neither one of them got a weapon up. Now, for reference, 130 rounds is not an arrest. That's what my uncle does to a paper target the first weekend of deer season, except the paper target usually survives. But that evening, the story was on every front page and radio in America. And Dillinger didn't need anybody to explain it to him. Nobody read a warrant on that road, and nobody shouted a warning. The lawmen studied who those two picked their spot and sat in the bushes until it was time to empty everything that they had brought with them. Now, here's the thing about Dillinger and those two. He had already given his opinion on them on the record to a reporter while he was locked up at the Crown Point earlier that year. That's the same jail he walked out of a few weeks later by bluffing the guards with a carved wooden gun, which was either the most audacious escape in American criminal history or proof that Indiana correction facilities had some hiring issues. Somebody asked him about Bonnie and Clyde, and he said they were a couple of punks. That was the professional census too. Real bank men looked at Barrow gang the way a licensed electrician looks at your brother-in-law who watched one video and rewired the garage. They robbed gas stations and grocery stores for lunch money, and instead of just leaving after a job, they'd get into panic shootouts with the small town constables. Now, Pretty Boy Floyd reportedly wouldn't even work with them. Dillinger was at the top of the outlaw ladder. Bonnie and Clyde were down around the bottom rung, and he had said so in the newspaper, which is exactly what makes his next 5 days so telling. Because the punks were dead, and the professionals understood something the papers were not printing. Those 130 rounds didn't check anybody's resume on the way in. If the government could find you, they would kill you. And being good at your job had nothing to do with it. The very same day Bonnie and Clyde died, a federal judge up in St. Paul gave Billy Fichette 2 years in prison for harboring Dillinger. So his girlfriend went to the pokey, and his colleagues got shot to pieces on the same calendar day. I've had some bad Mondays, but that one's hard to beat. Dillinger already had a plan in motion before any of this had happened, and the plan involved plastic surgery. His lawyer, Louis Piquet, who had been keeping Dillinger out of the courtrooms for years and knew where everybody was buried, everybody was buried, you gotta get that the way it said, figuratively speaking. Well, he had set it all up back in April, not long after Dillinger shot his way out of Little Bohemia Lodge ambush up in Wisconsin and left what would become the FBI looking like they had driven 6 hours to arrest a snowdrift and shoot some innocent people. The surgeon was going to be Dr. Wilhelm Lusser. He had practiced in Chicago for 27 years before our narcotics convention sent him to Leavenworth, which tells you the quality of medical care available to the wanted man. The price was $5,000. Piquet, Lusser, and an investigator named Arthur O'Leary split $4,400 of it. And Dr. Harold Cassidy got $600 to run the anesthetic, which almost killed him. Not Harold, but Dillinger. The operating room was the living room of a fellow named John Probasco on the north side of Chicago. When your surgery happens at a house with a fellow's name on the mailbox instead of a hospital, you're not on a good path. So Gibsland happens, And you'd think a man might pause and maybe look into Canada. Dillinger didn't cancel or even push things back a week. He moved into the Piasco house within days, and on the evening of May the 28th, Lawser and Cassidy showed up to operate. Bonnie and Clyde had been dead for 5 days. He watched the government's demonstration, and his response was to keep his appointment. Lawser testified later about exactly what Dillinger ordered, and if it reads like a man going down his own wanted poster with a red pen. He wanted the moles taken off of his forehead, and the corner of his eye lifted, left eye, and the dent in his nose filled. The scar on his upper lip was coming out, and the dimples were going too. It was like he was at a garage sale, right? Everything must go. He also had the corner of his mouth pulled up. He was deleting himself one feature at a time, like scraping the stickers off of a truck before you sell it. He chose to go fully under for it, and that decision nearly beat every lawman in America to the punch. Cassidy gave him too much ether. Dillinger swallowed his tongue, turned blue, and quit breathing right there on the table. Fortunately, Lawser was stable and grabbed forceps and pulled the man's tongue out of his airway, then drove his elbows into Dillinger's ribs until he started breathing again. Smart dude. I want him on my side. No, I don't. I don't want to be operated on by him. The most wanted man in the country came about a minute from dying in a bar owner's living room. 5 days after the two he called punks died on a Louisiana road. Wouldn't that have been pretty neat? A few days after that, Lawser burned Dillinger's fingerprints off with some caustic soda mix. And after all that money and all that risk, friends who saw him said he looked like he had the mumps. Oh, sheesh, you can't make that stuff up. Now, here's his reaction. That's where it stops being fear and becomes something else. A scared man disappears. Dillinger healed up through June and then went right back out into the city because he was a changed man, right? He kept a machine gun in an open case underneath Pobasco's piano. There was a shotgun under the parlor table too, which is a level of home defense that even my most prepared relatives would call excessive. Then he started dating a 26-year-old waitress named Polly Hamilton from a sandwich shop down in Wilson Avenue. She knew him as Jimmy Lawrence. He took her to restaurants and movie theaters in downtown Chicago, while every cop in America carried his photograph. Homer Van Meter was staying in the same house, and a witness later said Van Meter kept warning him about picking up women he knew nothing about. And you have to appreciate the position Van Meter was in here. Bonnie and Clyde died specifically because somebody inside their circle sold their location. Henry Melfin's family set that ambush up in exchange for leniency. It was in the papers, and Dillinger read them. Then he took his new girlfriend for a few weeks to the movies anyway. His new girlfriend for a few weeks, though. He didn't have very many left, right? Meanwhile, the government kept stacking wood. On June the 6th, President Roosevelt authorized reward money for criminals. Congress followed on June the 18th, giving federal agents full arrest powers and the guns to go with them. And on June the 22nd, the Attorney General named Dillinger's America's first public enemy #1. That happened to be his 31st birthday. Most men get a card, maybe a fishing trip. Dillinger got the federal government's top spot and celebrated by taking Polly out on the town. The new face had him feeling bulletproof. You gotta know it. Then he went back to work. On June the 30th, 38 days after Gibsland, he walked into the Merchants National Bank in South Bend, Indiana, with Van Meter and Babyface Nelson, and they robbed it. A police officer got shot during this job. That was the whole answer to the summer's big question. The ambush hadn't run him to Mexico or into a hole somewhere. He watched two outlaws get shot to pieces without a warning, then got himself a new face and a new girlfriend and hit another bank inside of all of 6 weeks. The bet lasted 60 days. Polly Hamilton lived with a woman named Anna Sage, but you didn't know that. Now, she ran a brothel over in Gary, Indiana, and Sage recognized Jimmy Lawrence. She was facing deportation to Romania, so she called the Federal Division of Investigation, that would later become the FBI, and offered to hand him over for reward money and help her with her immigration case. Don't believe the government when they're here to help you. On the night of July the 22nd, because that immigration case is a whole other story we won't get into. Now, on the night of July the 22nd, 1934, she went out to the movies with Dillinger and Polly at the Biograph Theater wearing an orange skirt so the agents could pick the group out of the crowd. The movie was Manhattan Melodrama, a Clark Gable gangster picture, which, if you're going to spend your last night on Earth at the cinema, is either a perfect choice or a deeply ironic, just depending on how you look at it. When Dillinger walked out around 10:30 in the evening, Melvin Purvis lit a cigar to signal the waiting agents so they would close in. He pulled a pistol and ran for the alley, and they shot him down before he reached it. Line it up next to May the 23rd, and it's the same job with different scenery. Somebody inside the circle traded him to the government. The lawman studied his habits and picked the ground, and nobody gave him a usable warning before the shooting got ruled justified. The surgery he nearly died for made no difference at all because the woman standing next to him showed the agents which man to shoot. I'm glad, well, if a woman could do that like that, make sure that you ain't her enemy, because you can't cut the dent out of your nose deep enough to fix a friend problem. The crowd finished it off. While Dillinger lay in the alley, souvenir hunters dipped newspapers and handkerchiefs in his blood. I heard somebody licked his blood too, but we're going to have an episode on that. Just 2 months earlier in Louisiana, crowds swarmed the death car and tried to cut pieces off the bodies before the officers pushed them back. That's Bonnie and Clyde. About 15,000 people filed past Dillinger at the Cook County morgue over the next day and a half. The same treatment the punks got from the same public. Whatever gap Dillinger believed sat between a professional and a couple of amateurs in a stolen Ford, neither the ambush nor the crowd ever saw it. So if you like this episode, go ahead and click that subscribe button and the hype button, and I'll see you in the next episode.